Hi, this is Adam Fisher, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to use Flash. Just for right now in this video, it's going to be basically the introduction to Flash and how the whole interface works. So when you open up Flash, the first thing you want to do is you want to select ActionScript 3.0. Now, we're going to learn ActionScript 3.0 for now, and then later down the line, eventually as we get more advanced with all the Flash series of videos, we'll be converting ActionScript 3.0 into HTML5. So, but for right now, we're going to do 3.0. When you enter into Flash, your interface should look like this. You have your stage here, you have your timeline down below, you have all your windows, and then over here you have your toolbar. It should be positioned on the right side of your screen. Yeah, I can at any time left click in the dark gray outside my stage, and I can change my aspect ratio right here, type in the number values that I want. You can also just change your stage color. If I click this, I grab any color I want for my stage. It's wise to keep it as white because eventually we'll be creating a background layer as we progress throughout this series of Flash videos, and the background layer will have certain action commands. Your FPS stands for frames per second. I could change this to whatever I want. We're going to leave it by default 24 because that complies with video. So just to understand how Flash works, at any time I can have the selection tool activated here, hold down the space bar on my keyboard, and just allows me to pan around in this area. Another thing we can do is actually let's start by looking at the shape. So I can come over here and left click on any kind of shape from the toolbar. I can do a rectangle, I can do an oval, I have the ability to do like a polystar. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do an oval. I'm going to roll out, say, oval tool. Hotkey is O. I can hold shift, click, and drag across my stage, and we'll create this oval. And then go ahead and immediately click the selectional tool. And if I select this oval, you're noticing if I click it and then click and drag out, it actually has a stroke and a fill shape. That's because when we created the oval originally, we had a stroke here, and we also had a fill. Now, at any time, I could simply just say, I don't want a stroke color. I just can click that little swatch and go, I don't want stroke. Or I can say, let's get the stroke black. I can click here and say, I don't want a fill color. So, whatever works for you. Just to understand how this actually operates, though, I'm just going to undo real quick. Any shape that you create in Flash, if you do create it with the stroke, you actually have to double-click the shape, and it allows you to select both the stroke and the solid, or the fill. Left click out here, it'll deselect. Again, if I double click, it selects everything. And then click outside deselect. If I just left click on the fill without doing the double click, then I can click and drag and I can move them and they can be separated. I could double click the stroke and then I can click and drag and move the stroke how I want. Okay? For both the stroke and the fill, I'm just going to do a Command Z and go back here. If I have the selection tool activated, I could just simply hover over the edge here and click and drag, and that allows me to conform this shape. I could create any kind of abstract shape that I'm looking for. I can then just left click on the fill, click and drag, move it out, and then I have that object to work with. I can then go back to the fill, and with it deselected, and then I simply hover over the edge, I could click and drag, and it allows me to move and modify this shape to my liking. If I go to the sub-selectional tool, which is A, and I'll left click that, and then I just left click anywhere on this line, I have the vertices that pull up. So if you're familiar with Adobe products that you used prior, then I can basically left click on one of these vertices and it gives me a Bezier handle, and I can manipulate it further here for that stroke. Same applies for the fill. If I left click on the fill and then I can see that these have vertices, I can move that around and then use the Bezier handle to modify the shape further. So let's go to click and drag and select all these. Now, every time you click and drag to select, make sure you are click and drag and selecting all the objects, because if you're noticing, if I just click and drag and select only this part of the objects that I want to delete, it's only selecting those areas of the objects. So when I hit delete, not all of the shapes have been deleted. So you have to click and drag and make sure you're selecting everything to delete it out. Now I'm going to go ahead and create another oval. Let's take a look here. Let's have a different fill color. I'll do a red. And this time, what I'm going to do is actually turn on what's called the object drawing, or if you click J on your keyboard, this allows you to actually create a shape with the bounding box. So I'm going to activate that. It's at the very bottom of your toolbar after you select a shape. You have to select a shape first, then you click object drawing. Again, you can select any of these shapes. And then once that's created, I can then click and drag, hold shift to create a nice uniform shape if I want. And when I release this, you're noticing, if I go to the selection tool up here, you're noticing it has a bounding box around this object. So how does this work to our advantage? Well, if I create a shape with a bounding box, and I deselect, if I just left click on it, notice I can't just click and select the fill. It selects the stroke and the fill together. So this allows us to actually cut down the process of having to basically double click, rapid click, and then move all of the shapes together as one object, where the bounding box, the object drawing, having the bounding box gives us the ability to actually move them together. So if I wanted to get back to where I could just select the fill and move the fill around, I would have this selected. If I use the object drawing parameter and I created that shape with it, I would have this selected. I could easily go up top, go modify, break apart, and Control B is that hotkey process. And then once that's selected, you'll notice that if I deselect here, we're back to square one. Okay. We select here and delete everything. All right, perfect. So now let's learn about the transform tool. I'm going to grab a rectangle this time. I'm going to select a different color here. Let's go with a nice vibrant blue. I'm going to grab the rectangle tool for this part of the lesson. I'm going to left click and drag and just create a rectangle here. And then with that rectangle created, I can just go back to my selection tool. I'll go ahead and select it. And then I'm going to select the transform tool over here on my toolbar. And I can hover my pointer over one of the corners and click and drag, and it gives me the ability to rotate this object any way I like. Now if I hold shift on the keyboard, it snaps that rotation into place. If I just click and drag the corner without rotating, I'm actually capable of modifying the shape, where I can shrink it down or stretch it out. I can even hover over like the inner side area, and I can click and drag and it squeezes it. And then the really neat part is I can actually hover the mouse between the 2 points. If I click and drag, it allows me to kind of create like a slant object. Now something that's really neat when you have the transform tool activated is I have what's called an anchor point. So if I click and drag this anchor point to, like, let's say the corner of this object, and then I go to rotate it, it's going to rotate based off that anchor. Go ahead and delete this object. Let's learn about snapping. So I'm going to grab the rectangle again. Let's do a different fill color. And notice that I'm grabbing the fill color before I create the shape. Click and drag, create this rectangle. I'm going to create another one. I'm going to create it a little bit similar. If I go into what's called the view menu here and I look down, it's going to have what's called the snapping parameter. So if these things are activated, and I'm going to bring them back to the defaults, if I have these activated, I'll show you what they're allowed to do. If I move one object in a position, notice that these snap bars appear. And that's a really good thing. It shows you that I'm able to actually move this object over where it's in complete alignment with the top part of the object. So when I get it close enough, it does a snap. And then I know for sure that those objects are united together. If I go up to the snap menu and I turn these off, I'm going to turn off the snap align, which is what we're looking at. I'm going to go back in the view menu, go snapping, I'm going to turn off snap to guides. Now I'm going to move this object over. Notice that those guides do not appear and it does not snap to the edges. And it gives me the flexibility to actually say, you know what, I want my shapes to overlap. And hence, I can move these two rectangles to create like an overlapping effect. Okay, so let's learn how to actually duplicate objects. I'm going to use the rectangle tool. I'm going to actually selected. I'm going to leave object drawing turned on. That way I'm creating it with the stroke and the fill, and they're united together as one. And I'm simply just going to go ahead and just click drag. I can hold shift to create a uniform rectangle and release. And then once that's created, all you got to do is just grab the selection tool here, and I'm going to make sure it's selected. And you can do one of two things. You go up to Edit, and you can just select Duplicate, or it's Control D as the hotkey. Once that's selected, notice that its duplicated copy comes out. And if you have your snapping turned on, let's go ahead and snap to align and snap to guides, both of those turned on, and I move it around, I can then simply snap and have these two perfect and copied rectangles side by side on the stage. Let me go ahead and just delete one of them. Let's just have one here. Another way you could do it is I could have this selected and go to Edit, Copy, and then immediately go to Edit, Paste in Place, which is Control-Shift-V. And then once it's pasted in place, I just click and drag, and you can see that that copy has been created as well. So that's another way of doing it. If you want to move objects just kind of like by points, picas, just select any object that's on your stage, and you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard. And you can choose which direction you'd like for it to be placed. We'll be a little bit more exact. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete these. So let's learn about the brush tool. So the brush tool is located right here in your tool palette. Looks like a small icon paintbrush. Hotkey is B. If I left click and select this, I can then go ahead and choose which fill color I want. So I'll come on down here and grab my fill color first. Take like a blue. If I have the object drawing turned on, it allows me to modify the brush stroke with a stroke of itself. But right now I'm just going to leave the object drawing turned off, what the brush tool can do. Down here in the tool palette, you notice I have different brush size settings. So I have one of the medium activated right now. I'm going to go and use it. And then at the very bottom of the toolbar with the brush tool activated, again, you can grab down here what's called the brush shape, and you can modify what kind of shape you'd like to draw with the brush tool. The brush tool is really great because it allows people who really enjoy using like Wacom tablets or drawing tablets to be a little bit more precise. So anyway, I'm just going to left click and drag across my stage with the brush tool activated here. If I left click and drag, you notice it's going to create a brush, release, and it creates what's called a smoothing effect. So right now my smoothing is turned all the way up to 100%. If I change this to, let's say, 50, and this is located underneath the properties menu for the brush at the bottom for smoothing, and change to 50, I'm going to create another brush stroke here with 50, left click and drag. And notice that it rounds out, but not to the extent like it was. So I'll undo. And this time, again, let's go ahead and you got to have the brush tool activated in order to see these properties. Always make sure you're on the Properties tab. Left click and take this to 0. Then left click and drag. And now it actually creates the brush as it would seem without any kind of smoothing applied. All right. So let's go ahead and create the brush with the object drawing activated. So I'm going to go ahead and left click, turn object drawing on. I've got my stroke color. I'm going to take my smoothing to 50. Again, you want to make sure you're on the properties menu if you're doing anything with shapes or brush, stroke, whatever you're doing. Make sure you're on the properties menu. Back to brush. And I'm going to go ahead and just create this with the object drawing turned on. Left click, drag. Let's create something 50% smoothing. Looks good. And now you notice that I created with the bounding box, and that's great, exactly what we want. And now when I release my click and create my brush stroke, I can go over here and I can actually add a stroke to my brush stroke. So I'm going to grab black, and then I can increase the stroke size. So right here I can left click and drag, and notice that now I have a stroke, a pretty thick stroke that follows my brush stroke, which is great. You can adjust the style. So if I want to make this, let's say a 4, yeah, and then the style, I can change the style to hairline, solid, dash, dotted. Let's see what the dash looks like. Really neat. I can indicate the kind of size I want, of course. Okay. If I want just the the style of the stroke. Let's do like ragged here. And I didn't want the fill. I could simply, under its properties, go to the fill color, select it, and then just say I don't want the fill. And then it leaves back just the style. Toon shading is a really fun little trick to know for Flash, because you can create some nice shade-sided for character designs. So in order to do toon shading, what I'm going to do is just going to change my color again. Let's see, let's pick a color, and then I'll go ahead and create a oval, and then I'm going to left-click drag and just create this oval with the drawing box activated. Looks like I had the dash stroke still applied from prior, so I'm going to change my stroke for my oval here. Which, if you're under the properties menu, you can do all this. So once you create your shape, have it selected, go under its properties, and simply just change the stroke to what you want. So anyway, that stroke style can be pretty much applied to any shape that you create. So anyway, that's what occurred here. And I'm going to go ahead and just create the shape. And then what I can do is actually, let's go to the line tool. So the line tool is right here. And the line tool reads basically off its own stroke color. So I'm going to do a black. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just left click and drag from one edge of this oval I've created to the other side. Now because we have, again, the snapping activated, it's going to allow me to actually select the edge. And if you notice, I'm able to actually click and drag for one of the edges, and it already understands to have that tip connected to the edge of the oval. And if I click and drag and I come over to the other side, it's snapping to the other edge of the oval on the other side, which is really nice. So I'm going to go ahead and release. And now I've created this line that basically both ends touch the outside stroke of this shape. Now this has a bounding box too, and that's okay. What I'm going to do is grab the selection tool, and what I can do is just like how we conform the edge that I taught you prior. So if I move my selection tool and it turns into this little curve icon that appears on my pointer, I can click and drag and conform this shape. Well, I can do the same thing with this line that I've created within the oval. So if I deselect it first, and then I move my pointer over the line until it turns into that little curvature icon, I can then click and drag, and allows me to bend and manipulate this further. So I'm going to go ahead and position like right about here. This looks good. Release my click. And then what I'll do is just click outside of deselect. And then what I'll do is, since we had the object drawing turned on when I created this shape, what I can do is actually, going back to selection, so I'm just going to click, drag, select both objects, and notice that they have bounding boxes. We're going to merge them together. So what I'm going to do is, going back to what we learned, I'm going to go to modify, break apart, and now all of it becomes together as one object. Click outside, and then look at this. This is great. I can actually left click and select which side of this internal part of the object or the fill that I want to either change color, or I could just move around and get rid of it if I wanted to. But in this case, because we're doing toon shading, I'm going to change the color of this side. So I'm going to select it, and I can go down to the fill, and instead of this darker one, I'm going to make it a little bit darker. Maybe, yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's say that's my shaded side of my character art, and then voila. Just like that, I can get a dark side and then a light side, and then I could maybe build a character's face right here if I wanted to. So let's learn how to import images into Flash that we can use to actually create our character concept art. So what I'm going to do is, in Flash, you can go to File, Import, and then what we want to do is we actually want to import the library. If we import to stage, it's going to import an image onto the actual stage, and that's what this is in Flash. But it doesn't give us the ability to actually use the image further, where we could bring multiple copies over at any time, and allows us to only modify it one time. So therefore, if we import to library, we're allowed to actually use the image as many times as we want. So I'm going to import the library. I'm going to track it down, and I found it. I've called it scale texture. I'm going to select it and say I want to bring it in. And once it opens, you actually have to go to the library menu. So if you look over here on the right side of the interface, there is a library tab. I'm going to left click that, And we're noticing already that's been imported into Flash. So if I left click it, it shows a little demo of what the image looks like, but it's not the actual image itself. And once I've created it, I can now select this layer. Notice it is .jpg. That stands for JPEG. And then I can click and drag, and I can drop this onto our stage, and there it is. Now, this is extremely huge. You have to be careful some of the images that you import into Flash. You probably want to find sizes that pretty much accommodate the stage that you're working with. What I'm going to do here is actually, after I've imported, if I want to scale this thing down, you can use the transform tool, hold shift and click and drag on the corners to scale it down to a reasonable size that fits the stage specifications. Go on and select the selectional tool. And you're noticing already that this image has a bounding box as if it was created using the object drawing option that we learned before. So once an image is imported to stage, the way we can actually modify or use it to our advantage is with it selected, going up to modify, and then we're going to select break apart. Just the same way as if we were breaking apart a drawn object in Flash, so we could use the fill and the stroke. So I'm going to break it apart, and now you're noticing that this image is now an editable image. So once it's broken apart, go ahead and grab the brush tool, like what we learned prior. I'm just going to go ahead and make the stroke and the fill black. And I'm going to go ahead and increase the brush tool size to a nice size here, like so. I'm going to turn the object drawing off. I'm going to make sure that's turned off. And I'm just going to basically click and drag. I'm going to brush some strokes across this broken apart image. Kind of like a little body for character. And once that's done, if I grab the selectional tool, I can now select it and notice that I can actually select the outer edges that I don't want and just hit delete on my keyboard. And this maintains the image itself within that boundary that we created using the brush tool. And again, you had to have object drawing turned off. Let's learn about layers. So right now, you're noticing that in the timeline, we have what's called layer 1. Well, anything that we create on a layer goes on that layer. So what we've designed here, this imported image, and also the new brush strokes to kind of create the outer dimensions of what we wanted for maybe this character here, it's all been created on layer 1. So I can go ahead and name this layer something that actually corresponds to what we've created. So I could basically name it, let's just name it character. So I can double click the name layer 1, and the rapid click, if I double click on it, I can then click and drag to select it. I can change this, call this character, and then hit enter to lock it in. Once it's created, I could do one or two things. I could basically select this image, and if I wanted to bring them together with a bounding box, a really neat little feature is I can go to Modify, Group, which is Control G. And if I group it, notice the bounding box comes back, and I'm able to then move the stroke that we created and the image together in union. Works pretty well. If on this layer I create at any time another object go over, let's say I wanted to create another object on this layer, and I wanted to create it over it, I would create it with the object drawing tool. Flash already understands that since this object was drawn and created second, that it's actually overlaying, it's in front of what we've created already, and it's on the same layer. But it's good that you have to have that object drawing activated. So using group, I can group items back together as if they are an object drawn shape or image. And then the same applies if I turn object drawing on. Flash already understands that this object is in front of it. You can go to Modify, Arrange, and with this image selected, which I have, I can say I want to send it to back, and now Flash understands to put this next drawn image behind what we've already created. So this is how you could build up your character designs if you wanted to, or anything on the stage in Flash very easily. Another way to do this, I'm just going to delete this shape that we created, and we're just going to maintain our character image with the group applied, is I can use layers. So I can come down here in the bottom left of Flash, and I can left click on what's called the new layer option. And if I click on this, it creates what's called layer 2. I can double click it, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to name this highlights. And with that layer selected, again, make sure you have the layers selected that you want to create on. In the past, I've had many of my students, they have the wrong layer selected. They start designing, and some of their elements are not actually grouped, nor do they have the object drawing, and they're kind of setting up for a very bad outcome. So make sure you know what layer you have selected first. Select here before you do anything here on the stage. I'm going to select layer 2, which I call it highlights. I want to create an oval. I'm going to make this oval white. I'm not going to create a stroke at all. I'm just going to click and drag and create it over the top of this character body. And once it's created, notice that it has the bounding box applied because I created with object drawing tool. So I'm going to use the selection tool to grab it, have it selected, and I'm going to go to modify break apart. Click outside to deselect, and now I can select it, and because this thing is on layer 2, I can move it to wherever I want, and it doesn't destroy the image underneath. Keep in mind that this oval, if I have it deselected, I can basically hover the pointer over to the edge of the oval I created, click and drag it. I can kind of bend this object, this shape itself, to where it looks more like kind of like a little bendy shape here as if it mimics a highlight. And then I've got my highlights for my characters. I can have it selected, and a neat little feature in Flash is the alpha. Alpha is basically opacity as it applies to other Adobe products. So I have this shape selected and come down to the fill, and I'm going to left click on the fill parameter. Notice that this was the color we wanted, okay? But if I open this up, I got a little alpha channel. I can click drag and scrub this number lower, but I can also just say click on it, and allows me to type in the proper, say 130, hit enter. If I click outside that shape, notice that it now has a see-through property applied to it. Real quick, I'm just going to go ahead and show you the bonus of using layers in addition to understanding how object drawing works and also the group method, which I've shown you. I'm just going to go ahead and just hide these layers. So I'm going to, you see the little eyeball, if I click the little dot that aligns with the eyeball for that layer, it turns them off. So they're still there. I can always left click and turn them back on, but I can kind of get them out of the way real quick if I want to design something else. Another feature I have is the lock option, so I can left click on these little dots and I can't click on them at all. Can't even click and drag and select them until I unlock them. So that really helps. What I'm going to do is just turn them off. I'm going to create a new layer. And once I create a layer, notice that it created between the two layers. So I'll have to select it, then click and drag, and you notice this black bar appears. It allows me to position this layer above all my other layers. Anything that's on top is what's seen. So it has a stacking method, an arrangement method in Flash. The same works. So if I have layer 3, I'm just going to name this lesson. And on this layer, what I want to do real quick is just show you the bonus of why grouping and object drawing and understanding arrangement of layers and arrangement of objects on a layer is so important. If I create another shape here, let's just create an oval. I'm going to create a fill. I'm going to bring its alpha back to 100. So I got alpha 100, its fill color. I'm going to click, drag, and just create the shape. It has an object drawing, so I'm going to turn this off. Let's go and create it. There we go. Let's say I created this shape without the object drawing turned on. And now I'm going to create another oval. Let's see. Click, drag. I'm going to create it over this shape. And then I'm going to immediately select the selection tool, grab the blue oval that I created over, and click and drag and move it out. And notice that Flash has this cut property. So anything that I select and I drop into another object and I release it and then I click outside it to deselect it, but then I go to select it and then click and drag and move out, it has a cut property applied to it. So that's really important to know and understand in Flash. But at the same time, it's really important to understand how object drawing, grouping of objects, and definitely arrangement of objects on layers that have been created with the object drawing is so important, so you don't run into this problem. But at the same time, you understand it because it can actually work to your advantage. If I had an oval created, and then let's say I want to create another one with like different color, and I created it, and then I went ahead, and again, none of these shapes that I've created had the object drawing activated. Let's say I want to create this other one to bend it, and then I could select it like we learned prior. I could drop it on top of this oval, click outside deselect, but then select it, and then click and drag and move it. It has the cut property, but what's really neat is we made a shape highlight on this oval, which now makes it look more three-dimensional. So it can kind of work to your advantage, but just understanding how it works. In this case, using the layers really helps. So I'm going to turn my layers back on, and notice that we've already created our highlight being on another layer, but we also had the opacity using the alpha channel on the fill. The next layer, what I'm going to do is now I'm going to rename this. I'm going to double click it and name this eyes. Hit enter, lock it in, and then what we can do is grab the oval again. I'm going to change its fill color to white. I'm going to show you a really fun method you could use to create eyes really quick for a character. Change the stroke to a black, and I'm going to click and drag, and I can hold shift if I want to create like a uniform scale sphere, or just hold shift. I want to kind of elongate a little bit, which I think I will. And I want to make sure I turn on object drawing and have it activated. So I'm going to click and drag and turn object drawing on, and voila, I got one. Now, with the object drawing that was turned on, I created it, I select it, and I got its bounding box. I can go to edit, copy, edit, paste in place, then click and drag and bring another one out. I can hold shift, and that allows me to move it parallel with the snapping and the alignment guides. Move this other one. I have two eyeballs now. Let's say I want my character, though, instead of looking this way, I want him to look that way. So I can basically have this one selected, and again, using what we've already learned, I can go to modify, arrange, and I can send it to back. And now it's going to understand to send this one entirely behind the other one, and now my character is going to be looking this way, which is exactly what I want. This is actually really great to know all these features, because it allows us to build something really quick without having to think so much. So got that established, and I'm going to use the same layer. I've got eyes, knowing that I know how to use all this. I can create another oval, change this fill to black. I'm going to click and drag and create the pupils. And since I had object drawing activated, I can now use the selection tool, left click, move it around where I want it. I'll have it selected again, edit, copy, edit, paste in place, click drag, hold shift, parallel out, position of the pupil, and voila. I got a really quick, constructed looking character. It looks like, since we have like a scaly texture here with a highlight, it looks kind of like we're building like a snake character, which is really neat. You can continue using all these tricks that we learned, building of shapes, building of characters, importing of images, and really building visual shapes to construct a character moving forward. And it will help you create some really neat setups for animation in the future. Keep in mind that you can go to my LinkedIn page at linkedin.com if you would like to link up with me and have me as a resource and a reference in your list of contacts. You can send me a message at my LinkedIn, and that will reach out to my Yahoo email, hence my Gmail accounts, and I can always be there to help you. Thank you for watching, and look forward to working with you.